All right, today we're going to talk about pivot tables. Pivot tables are great for visualizing your data in a certain way. It also pivots, which we'll talk about later, so you can visualize data in different ways. But to start with, we're just going to create a pivot table. You should have for this assignment downloaded, not downloaded, but made a copy of a pivot table for in this example. This is from Google, and so you should have made a copy of this, and this is what you should be looking at. You should have it open right now. If you don't, go ahead and pause maybe and get it open. Okay, assuming you've got this open now, let's just discuss what this is. Let's say you have a company and they have two divisions, the East Coast and the West Coast, maybe. And in each one of these divisions, they have four subdivisions. So you might have in the East Coast, for example, store number 4 could be a store. They just call it subdivision. In the West Coast, you might have a division, or store number 3. And so you've got, for example, this is in the East, on the East Division, this would be maybe store number 1. And then they have products they sell, and these would be product numbers. And then they might have sold 14 of those particular products. I don't know why that's formatted with dollar symbols, but we won't worry about it now. Those should be just product numbers. So, on the East Coast, in subdivision or store number 1, if you will, they've sold 14 units at $10 per unit. Okay, and in the East Coast division number 2, they've sold 15 units at $11 per unit. And then in the West division, in subdivision 1, 2, and then there's the East Coast. These are not in really any order here. In the East, in the West, I'm sorry. Here's another East Coast. Let me undo that. Didn't mean to drag that. Here's another East, and this is subdivision 3, and they've got 16 units. They've sold at $8 each. And so we can move them down. Here's East, subdivision 1 again. See, we had one of these up here. We have one down here, but this is a different product altogether that they're selling, and they've sold 10 of them at $9 per unit. So this is just raw data that we've got. We've collected it. I don't know how we collected it, but maybe our stores or our divisions report this information, and we put it in a spreadsheet. Okay, so to create a pivot table, and by the way, they've already created these down below, several pivot table examples in different tabs. But to create a pivot table, what we need to do is we need to highlight the data that we're going to use for the pivot table. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go to Insert Pivot Table. Now it's asking me, do I want a new sheet? These are called sheets down below, right? And so this is the data set sheet. This is our data in one sheet. We could create this pivot table here in the sheet itself, or we could use a new sheet. So let's use a new sheet, and I'm going to create it. And notice it now has pivot table number 6. Evidently, we've gotten other pivot tables. I'm going to go ahead and rename this to my name pivot table, since I'm doing it. So now, misspelled pivot, of course, let's fix that. So now I've got me a tab, a sheet, if you will, or a tab, you can call it, that has a pivot table. Now I need to add to this pivot table, and I'm going to go ahead and pull these over. Actually, you know what? I want to stop for a second. I'm going to show you their pivot table so we can read the pivot table and what it means. If you notice this, we've got the East Division and we've got the 4 subdivisions, and then we've got the total number of units sold. So East Division number 1, subdivision number 1, has sold 24 units at an average price of $9.50. West Coast or West, and there's the East total, by the way, $9.75 is the average. That's the average, I should say. 24 units total, that's a sum. And so the West Coast, you have the same sort of data. And here's the West Coast total. So the average for the West total is $10.50. Overall, our grand total is 192 of all units, and $10.07 is the average price per unit. So if we go back to CAMAX pivot table, how will we make this? Okay, so what we want to do is we want to add some rows. So we click Add, and we can add any one of these rows, but let's start with the division. So we've got East and West, so it adds us a row for East and West. Let's add another row by clicking Add here, and we're going to add the subdivision. So now notice we've got East and West, and we've got the 4 subdivisions in those 2 main divisions. Okay, and then now we need to add some values. So I'm going to click Add, and I'm going to add the number of units. Okay, and then I'm going to add the price per unit. Okay, it's a little hard to see, but so I'm going to close this out. We can always come back in and edit it here, and we get that back. I've tried to make this screen a little bigger, so that, but you can't fit as much on it, but so the video would be a little more clear. So notice then we've got this. We've got the East says we have 99. That's the sum of the. By the way, we can come in here. This is handy too. Let's come in here and let's highlight these two. And let's go to our menu here and let's wrap the text so you can see it. So the sum is there's 24 units sold by subdivision 1 in the East division. The total price when you add up all the prices would be $19. So we want to change this a little bit. What I would really like to do is get the sum and the average here. So what we want to do is we want to go back and edit this. And so we're going to edit. And if you notice the number of units, that's the number of units right here. We've got it summarized by sum. Let's do average. And now you see it's the average number of units rather than the sum. Let's go back and change that to sum though. And then we need to do the same thing, or we can do something similar to the price per unit. And I think in their example, they have average here. And so if I close this, you'll see that the average price per unit is 10 for the East Division to Subdivision 1. The sum, the total of the units that they shipped was 24. And so you can see, you can get any of these numbers here. That's a real quick pivot table. We'll talk a little later about how to pivot the pivot table. So, but you should recreate this for the assignment.